My mother taught me resilience, perseverance in the face of her own pain. She had a very hard life, and she taught me that you don't stop. You find ways around, you network with other people, you persevere. So she taught me resilience. When I was 14, I fell in love with God, or God grabbed me by the neck and said, I'm going to take care of this kid. So I fell in love with church and the Bible and worship and the people that were in church, and they loved me. So, when you are well loved, you find compassion when it's offered to you. Compassion is something that we're taught, and I was taught it exquisitely well. Not by my parents, but by the many people in my world that loved me. Well, we were really poor when I was young, and somewhere along the line, I'm not sure even where I learned this, but somewhere in all of that, I learned that social workers were folks who helped people, and I was that kid, who volunteered and did all sorts of helping kinds of things. And somewhere in all of that, someone must have said, have you ever thought about social work or considered social work? Or you're the kid who helps other people, so you might want to consider that. One of my first responsibilities as a social worker was in long-term care. So I was a social worker, and then I became a supervisor, supervising young social workers and teaching them how to be social workers in a nursing home setting. People think of any work within long-term care as depressing. They say things to you like, "Oh, you work in a nursing home. That must be really depressing." But really, for those of us who were in it, when you go into somebody's room and they don't have a whole lot of visits, and people are not always kind to them. So if you take their hand, or you rub their arm, or you touch them, if you lower your voice into a calm, gentle tone, if you listen to them, if you look at them in the eye, and talk to them as real people who have things to share, that isn't depressing at all. They're so grateful that it was a joy to go into work for most days. I was a social worker in corrections, and precisely I was a probation and parole agent, is the language within corrections, was and is. So when I was a baby agent, a rookie, I was scared most of the time because it's walking in the underbelly of the community with some really difficult people. I loved working with young, fresh, excited folks, and teaching them not just tools of the trade, because correctional social work has a bunch of things you have to learn, but also how do you infuse ethics and compassion into that work. When you're sitting in front of an armed robber or a murderer or a rapist, and you nonetheless still have to care about them on some level in order to work with them.
I think she learned a lot about systems and how systems work in her studies as a social worker, where she then brought that not only to training young social workers that are working in the criminal justice system and how to understand family systems and that, but she's been able to apply that as well into church systems. And so she, again, does a lot of teaching as she's leading, and I think that's a great quality to have.
for those people who are familiar with the Bible, they may be familiar with the time when Paul was on his way, St. Paul was on his way to Damascus. And on the road to Damascus, he met Jesus, and it changed his life. I was driving from Milwaukee to Madison, and I had the previous Sunday seen a woman pastor. And, you know, it was a really good experience. I was very impressed with her. She preached dynamically. And so now I'm driving from Milwaukee to Madison, and somewhere around Dousman, it hit me, I could do that.
Debra is easily challenged by abuse of authority and power. And she has, in the time that I've known her, since her adulthood, midlife adulthood until now, she has navigated times and situations where she has been able to speak truth to power. That's one of the things that distresses her the most, is the abuse or taking away the voice of the voiceless, minimizing those who need the most lifting up. And I think that has been her greatest challenge and one of her greatest gifts at the same time. I remember this was in the early days of our friendship. She and I were, I don't know, probably leaving a meeting or something, and she got a phone call, and she had to go down and confront the police who were harassing the people who were sleeping on her property. The church had a policy with the unhoused people who lived there, and that they could sleep there if they were respectful of the property, and they always were. And this was kind of a sweeping thing in the city, and the police were there harassing her, and I sat there watching her in awe. Probably her life in corrections helps her to speak to law enforcement people as if they're peers, but nonetheless, she was able to turn the situation around, calm the police down, calm down the unhoused folks who were there, and manage that situation, I thought, beautifully. My heart was racing, but she did great.
When I was at St. James and St. Christopher's came open, and there was some outreach to me from the folks at St. Christopher's. So St. James in the poorest zip code in the state, 53233. St. Christopher's in the richest zip code in the state, 53217. And people said, "Oh, you can't go there. You know, your poverty ministry, you can't, you know." But here's the thing, the very, very rich still need to hear the gospel.
So she led a rich career as a social worker and then went into the priesthood. And 29 years later, she was recognized by the Wisconsin Association chapter of National Association of Social Workers. She was recognized as Social Worker of the Year for her leadership with the unhoused and the unhoused throughout Milwaukee. So I think that was a pretty remarkable testimony to the work that she's done and the recognition she had that went far beyond just the walls of her church or her parish.
When I was a senior in seminary, my bishop called. There was a case in Milwaukee. When you're a senior in seminary and your bishop calls you and asks you or tells you to do something, you say yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, now, and you do it. So I learned then how to take the skill set that I had from having been the supervisor of the sex offender unit of Milwaukee County, and use those investigative skills and merge them with church law, and subsequently became an expert in church canon law. For the last 30 years, really, I've been working with clergy misconduct cases, predominantly within the Diocese of Milwaukee, but also nationally, and teaching other bishops and other clergy how to manage complex clergy misconduct situations. I love what I do, and I'm good at it, and it's a niche skill set, so I feel an ethical obligation to offer it as much as I can. But what the future holds, well, that's in God's hands. And ultimately, I hope to be in God's arms.